HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Withdrawing Room by Charlotte Macleod, read by Susan Boyce. Chapter 1.
Damn it, Sarah. You can't do a thing like that. What will the family say?
Cousin Dolph's jowls quivered with empurpled outrage. Dolph went in rather heavily for outrage.
Who cares what the family says?
Uncle Jem yelled back. Jeremy Kelling was not more than 5 years older than his nephew Adolphus, but relationships among the vast Kelling clan came in all sizes and assortments.
I've never listened to any of them, and I've lived a hell of a lot more satisfying life than the pack of you put together. Bah! You talk a lot, but you never did anything. If I had 5 cents for every woman you've—
Dolph recollected that he was in the presence of Sarah, whom he still thought of as a puling infant, notwithstanding the fact that she'd been married and widowed.
Anyway, I wouldn't be a dime richer than I am now. The devil you wouldn't. You're so flaming rich. Why don't you stump up for Sarah's mortgage?
Adolphus Kelling waxed even purpler.
What are you preaching to me for? Why don't you? Because I didn't come in for old Fred's wad as you're about to, and I've rioted away my substance as fast as it came in on wine and wassail, as a sensible man should. And I've dipped into capital, too, and you needn't start yelling again because I don't give a damn. At least I wouldn't give a damn if it weren't for this outrageous mess over the mortgages. Sarah knows I'd give her the money like a shot if I had it.
Sarah Kelling, though many years younger and a great deal smaller than either of the combatants, managed to raise her voice above the tumult.
Shut up, both of you. I don't want anybody to give me the money. This is my mess, not yours. I'm only grateful Alexander didn't live to find out what was going on.
This was a lie, and Sarah's voice was none too steady by the time she'd finished uttering it. Alexander would in truth have been devastated to learn that his young wife, whom he'd thought he was leaving amply provided for, might wind up without so much as a roof over her head. Yet to have lost him so suddenly and so dreadfully was a shock she still hadn't got over and probably never would. In a way, Sarah could not herself understand why she was trying to make Dolph and Uncle Jem listen to this idea of hers. It would be far easier to chuck the whole business, let the bank foreclose, and be shut of both the tall Tulip Street townhouse on Beacon Hill and the far too large summer estate at Ireson's Landing, about 20 miles north of Boston. Then there wouldn't be the agony of waking up every morning and finding herself in the house alone. She wouldn't be a pauper in any case. Sarah still had her own small income from the trust her father had set up. She'd soon reach her 27th birthday and be able to take charge of the principal which had escaped the looting of the Kelling estate, although her father himself had not. But to give up so easily, to haul in her horns and slink off without a fight, seemed too much like a betrayal of the long, lonely battle Alexander had waged to save something for her. So she'd thought the matter over, weighed the fors and againsts, and come up with what she'd honestly believed a sober, dignified, reasonable solution to her immediate problem. She might have known that no matter what she proposed, she'd be precipitating a full-scale family fracas.
You've got no more knowledge of finance than a goddamn tomcat,
Dolph was informing Jem, neither of them having paid any attention whatever to Sarah.
You ought to know I shan't be able to touch a penny of Uncle Fred's money for at least a year. And then there are all those charitable bequests to be taken care of. By the time I've paid the inheritance taxes and forked over endowments for 57 different foundations and whatnot, I expect to be a damn sight poorer than I am now.
He winced at his own words. The thought of having to dip into his own pocket was always a painful one for Dolph.
Money isn't worth a damn these days anyway, he concluded sulkily. A fact which ought to bring you to your senses, if you had any, and make you realize how much more intelligent I was to blow mine while the blowing was good than you were to sit on yours and hatch a rotten egg," said Jeremy Kelling. "Bah! And what have you got to show for all your carousing? Cirrhosis of the liver, and a tail feather from one of Anne Corio's doves, and the fluorescent tassel off Sally Keith's left buttock," the retired roue added blandly. "Ah, those hallowed days, around the bar at the dear old Crawford house, with Sally up there twitching and twirling, a bowl of chips, a poussé café, and thou. Not you, naturally, you overstuffed lout. Did I ever tell you about Milly? The—"
"Will you two stop it?" shrieked his overwrought niece. "I don't want to hear about anybody's misspent or unspent youth. I want you to help me start a boarding house. And quit telling me I can't, because I'm going to. Do I need a permit or what? Dolph, you know everybody at City Hall. Can't you pull some strings?"
"Yes, Dolph, pull some strings," said Jem. "Strings don't cost anything. I know you'd never stoop to bribery because you're too damn cheap."
His nephew glared and decided to retire into outraged hauteur.
"I dare say I could handle the formalities if Sarah persists in going through with this crack-brained scheme."
"I'd be a lot more crack-brained to let the High Street Bank grab my property without a struggle, wouldn't I?" Sarah was, after all, a Kelling herself, both by birth and by marriage to a fifth cousin once removed. What's so crack-brained about a boarding house anyway? Lots of perfectly respectable people have done the same. Look at Mrs. Craigie.
I'd forgotten about Mrs. Craigie. Cambridge woman, right? And that Longfellow chap stayed with her. Wrote poetry, of course, but his people were all right, and he married an Appleton. Well, I suppose if you make sure to take the right sort, the hell with that," said Jeremy Kelling. "Take the ones who don't squawk about the money. Stick 'em, Sarah. Make the suckers pay through the eyeballs for the privilege of living in a stately mansion in a fine old historic district and all that garbage. Put on a show. I'll pop in and play autocrat of the breakfast table." "Hell of an autocrat you'd make," sneered Dolph. "And what do you mean, breakfast table? You never even drag your rum-soaked carcass out of bed till noon, degenerate old souse."
"Truer words were never spoken, though I must say it's a refreshing change to hear any truth spoken by you," replied his uncle with the courtliness for which the Kellings were noted. "Getting back to this boarding-house business, Sarah, are you in fact planning to serve meals?" "I'm going to do breakfasts and dinners. That way I can ask a lot more rent, and since I'm used to cooking for the family anyway, I should be able to manage without much difficulty."
"I thought Edith did the cooking," said Dolph.
"All Edith ever did was sit and nurse her bunions and complain about being overworked." Firing her mother-in-law's former maid, even though doing so cost a monthly pension she could ill afford, had so far been Sarah's one compensation for widowhood. "I've hired Mariposa Fergus in her place. You remember that adorable young woman who was such a prop and mainstay during the funeral? She and Charles are going to live down in the old kitchen."
"Who's Charles?"
"A friend of hers, who looks like Leslie Howard and talks like a cross between Henry Higgins in Pygmalion and Sir Percy Blakeney in The Scarlet Pimpernel."
"How the hell would you know? Leslie Howard's been dead since 1943.
"I used to see the reruns at the Brattle Theatre. Anyway, Charles is alive enough, from what Mariposa tells me."
"My God, Sarah, you can't have a pair like that fornicating all over the back stairs. Can't you at least make them get married first?"
"I shouldn't dream of trying. Mariposa says she's tried it both ways, and this is more fun. And Charles would merely arch his eyebrow with aristocratic hauteur. He has the most fetching golden curls, but he's going to slick them down when he buttles. His name is Charles C. Charles."
"The other C being for Charles, I take it?"
"No, I believe it's for Chelsea. That's where he comes from. He's an actor by profession, but he's resting at the moment."
"That means unemployed, Dolph," explained Jem. "Like you."
"Oh, no," said Sarah. "Charles works in a factory daytimes, and he's going to Buttle here during dinner for his room and board. He's been yearning to play Mr. Hudson ever since upstairs downstairs, and he's studying up madly on whether to serve the hock with the guinea fowl, though of course we shan't be having any. I do know scads of ways to fix chicken and Hamburg, though, and I'm marvelous at pinching pennies when I grocery shop. I had to be, considering what Alexander gave me for a housekeeping allowance, though he meant it for the best, poor darling."
Dolph shook his jowls. "Forget it, Sarah. You'd need at least a dozen boarders to make it work, and you've only got 3 bedrooms in the whole damn house."
"Dolph, that's ridiculous. There's the other basement room, for one, that Edith used as her bedroom. I thought I might rent that to a student or something, since they'd have to share the bathroom down there with Mariposa and Charles."
"Never get a nickel."
Sarah ignored him. "And I'm turning the drawing room into a sort of private suite for someone old and rich who can't climb stairs. I've already had a door cut through from that powder room in the hall, and I've spoken to the plumber about putting in a stall shower there. I'm selling that McIntyre escritoire to pay for the renovations. It's not under the mortgage, is it?"
"Don't ask," Uncle Jem advised. "And what, pray tell, will you then use for a drawing room?" scoffed Dolph. "Why the hell should she need one?" Jeremy Kelling sneered back. "Idiotic antediluvian custom anyway, the ladies withdrawing to sit on their bustles and gossip, while the men stayed at the dining table and drank themselves blotto. When I start seeing double, I'd rather be sitting across from a daring décolletage than a red nose with a walrus mustache under it. Did I ever tell you about—"
"I'm sure you did," Sarah interrupted. "You're quite right. I don't need one. I'll use the library, as I'm doing now." The high-ceilinged room where they sat, with its book-lined walls, its worn red velvet draperies, the portrait of the Kelling who'd founded the family fortunes over the mantel, and the dark old leather sofas and armchairs grouped around the fireplace, was far and away the pleasantest room in the house. "And I'll keep Aunt Caroline's room on the second floor for myself, and turn her boudoir into a studio. I did all that book illustrating for Harry Lackridge, you know, and I'm sure I can get work from other publishers to bring in a little extra money. And on the third floor there are Alexander's and my old rooms with the bath in between, and Mariposa has got one of her brothers-in-law, either past or present, I'm not sure which, to help me fix up those 2 in the attic that used to be the maids' rooms, and put another bathroom there, so that will give space for 6.
"Ridiculous!" shouted Dolph. "Who's going to climb all those stairs?"
"Lots of people around the hill live in 4th-floor walk-ups. Anyway, if I can't rent them, I'll move up there myself and rent the second."
"Don't you do it, Sarah," said Jem. "Take the best for yourself and put on the dog. Treat 'em like dirt, and they'll eat out of your hand. Try to be a pal, and they'll walk all over you." "I hate to admit it," snorted Dolph, "but the old goat's right. You stick to your guns. Don't budge an inch for anybody. Speaking of which, where do you propose to find these hypothetical lodgers?"
"Advertise, I suppose."
"In the newspapers? My God, that's the last straw. What would Aunt Bodie—" "Dolph," shouted his uncle, "if you don't quit dragging the whole damn clan into this, I'll get Egbert to poke you straight in the jaw."
Egbert, Jeremy Kelling's man for all seasons, had been known to perform stranger assignments than this.
"Boudica's a fine one to talk, anyway. She'd rent her own bridge work if she could find any takers."
"I couldn't possibly care less about Aunt Booty," said Sarah. "Furthermore, Aunt Emma's all for it. We talked over the whole plan while I was staying out there after it was all over. She's the one who thought of doing up the old maids' rooms. As a matter of fact, I'd forgotten those attic rooms were ever used for sleeping. She even gave me some blankets and linen."
"Then why didn't you say so in the first place?" Dolph snarled. "Emma's got a head on her shoulders at least."
That, from him, was highest praise.
"Mabel will raise hell on general principles, I dare say, but who gives a damn for what Mabel says?"
"And I've also mentioned it to Honora Prothero," Sarah went on, referring to an old and respected friend in Chestnut Hill. "And she's terribly relieved that I shan't be trying to stay on here alone. She's going to see if she can't get me a boarder for the drawing room. You know him, that Mr. Quiffen, who's her husband's old fraternity brother or whatever?"
"Quiffen? Must have met him some time or other, I suppose, though I can't recall him offhand. At any rate, if he's a pal of George's, he probably has sleeping sickness, so he oughtn't to cause you any trouble," chirped Uncle Jem. "You see, Sarah, that's how you work it. Drop a word here and there to the right people, and you'll find takers fast enough. I'll start alerting the tribe myself. How are you fixed for beds and stuff, by the way? Shall I do a little panhandling on the side?"
"No, thank you. I'm reasonably sure I can bring what I need in from the place at Ireson's. Mr. Lomax, our caretaker out there, has a friend who will lend him a truck."
"Uses it to lug fish heads to the glue factory, no doubt, and your mattresses will stink to high heaven by the time they get here," said Dolph with his customary optimism. "Well then, Sarah, since you've made up your mind to cut your own throat, I'll see what I can do about getting you a permit."
Chapter 2. After this family discussion, if such it could be called, Sarah went into high gear. She got Mariposa to round up a few more brothers-in-law and sold the McIntyre escritoire. She knew she was getting skinned on the price, but there was no help for that. Bills for labor and materials were piling up, and she needed cash in a hurry. Perhaps she could have kept herself going by selling off the family treasures one by one, but she saw no point in just surviving. Having people around her and work to do at least kept her from thinking too much. Sarah was still handicapped by an arm injury that hadn't fully healed. She couldn't paint or wallpaper, but she could do small jobs and drive the 1950 Studebaker Starlight Coupe that had been bought new for Aunt Caroline and kept running like a charm by Alexander. That would have to be sold, too, if anybody was buying Studebakers these days. She had nobody now to do the repairs. Garaging and insurance at Boston rates would be far beyond her straitened means. She'd already made the grim decision to take the old car off the road at New Year's, but right now she must have transportation. When she wasn't urging her work crew to yet more frantic efforts, she was dashing from the tiny, twisting streets of Beacon Hill, lined with unbroken rows of elegant and once elegant townhouses in brick and brownstone, with their bullfinch fronts and wrought-iron grills, their window boxes so carefully tended in summer, so festive now with evergreen boughs and dried scarlet salvia, out to the deserted Victorian clapboard ark at Ireson's Landing on the North Shore. There, with the wind howling around her ears and the ocean pounding on the rocks in the distance, she roamed her vast, overgrown estate with Mr. Lomax, the caretaker, marking trees for him to cut and sell. With firewood at something like $150 a cord, the proceeds ought to pay his wages and, God willing, leave something over toward the back taxes. Sarah and Alexander had talked of selling off some of the land, but she couldn't do that now on account of the pending litigation. She could and did pillage the house to furnish her empty bedrooms. If she managed to rent the estate next summer, Mr. Lomax would have to borrow the truck again and bring back all the beds and dressers, no doubt, but by then she'd either have money enough for replacements or else have made such a fiasco of her boarding house idea that she'd have to pitch a tent out here among the chipmunks and live on roots and berries. Going to bed totally exhausted every night had its advantages. Sarah had no time to brood over Alexander, though she missed him 50 times a day. She couldn't keep calling the workmen from their more vital tasks to help her spruce up battered chairs and chests, hang curtains, do all the puttering odd jobs he'd performed so expertly and enjoyed so much. Charles and Mariposa did their best, and it would have to be good enough. After dinner, when Sarah was too worn out to work any longer, she would put on high heels to raise her 5 feet 3 inches to a more imposing stature, don a black crepe dress of her mother's that was old enough to be back in style had any true Boston lady ever given more than a passing hoot for the vagaries of fashion, sweep her light brown hair into a twist that lent a few years and an air of dignity to her small, pale, squarish face, and grant interviews to prospective tenants. Jeremy Kelling had been right about applicants. Once the news got around that the same Sarah Kelling who'd made headlines a month ago was now opening her home to paying guests. She had them camping 3 deep on her doorstep. Her chief problem was to weed out the insolvent, the impossible, and the sensation seekers who didn't really want to move in but couldn't resist a chance to gawk. For this, she relied heavily on the superior worldly wisdom of her household staff. About 80% of the hopefuls never got past the vestibule. Those who did got a shrewd going-over from the apparently impassive maid and butler. A muttered, "Honey, this baby's for the birds," from Mariposa wiped out a beautifully dressed lady who was an ardent volunteer for one of Dolph's inherited charities. The merest flicker of Charles's eyelids turned away several others whose references and manners appeared impeccable. Her assistants themselves were impeccable, and then some. The pair had insisted on providing themselves, out of Charles's paycheck from the plastics factory, with uniforms suited to their positions as they conceived them. Mariposa had elected to set off her trim figure and vivid coloring in bright orange, topped by a frilly white cap with long orange velvet streamers. Charles was the epitome of what the well-dressed Eaton Place butler should wear, up to and including the white cotton gloves, though his were in fact drip-dry nylon, which he felt Mr. Hudson would have pardoned since Mariposa made him wash them himself. His dress suit had come from the costumers with certain embellishments, but Sarah had persuaded him to save the red ribbon and row of medals until he was either made ambassador to somewhere or offered a bit part in the Merry Widow. Indisputably, the uniforms lent cachet to the establishment. The mere sight of Charles in full panoply was enough to discourage most of the ineligibles. Those who did manage to run the barricade, having been formally announced by Charles and then served a minuscule glass of sherry on a silver tray proffered by Mariposa in her beribboned cap, were far less apt to quail at the rates Sarah quoted. The 3 had decided together that it would be easier, and what Charles referred to as better theater, to assemble the cast of boarders all on the same day, rather than have them trickle along one by one. Since it was fiscally vital to set the day as soon as possible, the Tulip Street house began to look like the setting for a Keystone Cops movie, with people flying in all directions at impossible speeds. Sarah developed quite a talent as a nagger. When she flagged, Jeremy Kelling was ready to take over, either because of his expert chivying or because they couldn't endure to stay and hear any more of his reminiscences. The plumbers, carpenters, electricians, and decorators made well-nigh superhuman efforts to meet their deadlines. Cousin Dolph was as expeditious and no doubt a good deal more obnoxious in getting the required license. Thanks to the plethora of applicants, Sarah had her boarders all chosen well before the last nail was driven and the last curtain hung. Mrs. Thellonia Sorpende was to have Sarah's old room. Mrs. Sorpende was a stately, handsome, middle-aged lady of brunette complexion, almost overpowering refinement, ineffably gracious manner, and a surprising streak of dry humor. She said she wouldn't mind the 2 flights of stairs a bit, and added with a ruefully amused glance down over her Juno-esque contours that she could use the exercise. She was a widow, and dressed the part in a simple black dress and coat, though she had relieved the somber costume with a wine-colored velvet turban and matching handbag and gloves. She had few acquaintances in Boston, and would be living very quietly. The name she gave as a reference was Mrs. G. Thackford Bodkin, a friend of Aunt Marguerite's in Newport. with Mariposa making thumbs-up signs behind the lady's back, and Charles so far forgetting himself as to mouth a fervent hubba hubba. Sarah dispensed with Mrs. Bodkin and accepted Mrs. Sorpende on the spot. Alexander's room would be occupied by a Miss Jennifer Lavalliere, who probably would not be living very quietly. She was another who needed no investigating, since her grandmother lived just around the corner and had served on committees with Aunt Caroline. She was perhaps attractive, if one could have seen beyond the frizzy hair and the assortment of garments awful enough to be, no doubt, the ultra-chic of the moment. Sarah hoped the moment would soon pass. Miss Lavalliere had caught the career bug and was doing a business course at Katy Gibbs, which had also given her a plausible excuse to get away from her vigilant parents in Lincoln. What she'd wanted, of course, was an apartment of her own in town. Mrs. Kelling's boarding house was a family-approved compromise that couldn't have been wholly acceptable to a 19-year-old with advanced ideas, but the girl was taking it well enough. She seemed to be an agreeable little thing on the whole. Sarah couldn't recall that she herself had ever alternated with such blinding rapidity between ultra-mundane sophistication and fits of the giggles. But at Jennifer's age, she'd already become a married woman, with 2 big places to keep and a blind, deaf tyrant of a mother-in-law to cope with. On the top floor, she was putting Mr. Eugene Porter Smith, an elderly gentleman of about 27. He put Sarah in mind of W.S. Gilbert's ballad of the precocious baby, although he was by no means a fast little cad like that disreputable infant, and certainly not about to die an enfeebled old dotard at an impossibly early age. He worked for Sarah's third cousin Percival as an accountant. Percival vouched for him as a model of rectitude, and what Percy didn't know about rectitude wasn't worth knowing. Moreover, Mr. Porter Smith was into, as he said, mountain climbing, and proved it by taking the 3 flights in high gear without a single puff. Mr. Porter Smith looked decorous enough, at any rate, with his neat 3-piece suit and his sand-colored hair slicked back from a thinnish face that was neither attractive nor ugly, but merely present in the usual place. His frame was spare and wiry, his height perhaps 5 feet 9 or 10, his pale blue eyes sharp and inquiring. Mr. Porter Smith was obviously a man who liked to know things. In fact, he spouted information on any given subject at such a rate that Sarah suspected him of reading the encyclopedia in his spare time, which was surely a habit no landlady could disapprove. Her other attic room was assigned to Professor Oscar Ormsby, a burly, hirsute man of 50 or so who wore hairy tweed suits and brown turtleneck jerseys and taught aerodynamics at Massachusetts Institute of Technology just across the river. When Sarah apologized for the rooms being so high up, he grunted, "Hadn't noticed." That was about all Professor Ormsby did say, except to grunt again as he wrote the check for the first month's rent in advance, which Charles and Mariposa had drilled Sarah always to insist on and ask what happened if he didn't show up for meals. Sarah and Mariposa had that one all worked out. "If you call the house sometime during the day and let us know you're going to be late, we'll keep something hot for you. If you don't call, you'll be free to go to the kitchen when you come in and help yourself to a snack from the refrigerator. If you choose to eat out, we can't give you a refund, but we do allow you to bring a guest free of charge any time within the month. With proper notice, of course. If you haven't missed a meal but still want to bring a guest, there is a $10 charge. In advance," she added, responding to the frenzied pantomime Charles was going through behind the professor's back. Uncle Jem had set the fees, and while they were indeed far from cheap, they were still lower than the cost of maintaining an apartment, and much less than living at a hotel and eating in restaurants. Costs of food, salaries, utilities, and maintenance would have to be deducted from the gross, but Sarah figured that with careful management and her monthly allowance from the trust, she'd clear enough to stay afloat until she knew where she stood with the bank. Her basement room was the only one not yet ready to let. Sarah was still in a quandary about whom to put there. She'd abandoned the idea of students. They might not mind sharing a meager bath with the maid and butler, or object to their occasionally...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?